And so where we're at right now is we're still looking at pantheism. And as I explained, pantheism is a major worldview in our culture right now. You're going to run into a lot of people who consciously embrace it. They believe that God is one with nature, that they are God or a part of God. And you're also going to run into many other people who haven't thought through all the implications of things that they're doing, but the things that they're doing couldn't be true unless pantheism was true. And I explained that last week with the examples of therapeutic touch, and any idea of some kind of life force that is coursing through your body that you need to release or balance. All of that presupposes a pantheistic worldview. There's no grounding for that idea of a life force in materialism, because the universe is essentially not alive, and life is just an accident that happened in organisms that accidentally evolved and got going and reproduced themselves. Or in a Christian worldview, the universe is created by God, sustained by God, but God is supernatural and the universe is natural, and it's not like God's life force is pulsing through the universe and pulsing through your body. That's your own organic life. And exactly what life is a mystery, but it's not like some current like electricity, that pulses and that can be measured. There's no scientific measurement for bioenergy. There's no such thing scientifically. So to believe in that, you've got to merge the spiritual and the physical realms, which is exactly what pantheism does. And it says that the true nature of matter is spirit, and God is a force, God is an energy, God is a life force or a cosmic consciousness, and therefore He pervades the universe and pervades our bodies. And so when this life force gets blocked, then we become sick. So whole theories of disease and wellness have been created on the idea of on the basis of the intellectual basis of pantheism. And so that's the kind of thing that we encounter in this culture. Pantheism is pervading our culture even when people haven't thought through the logical implications of what they're embracing to reach the pantheistic conclusion. But many people have reached that conclusion, and that's one of the reasons they promote some of these life, vital force or life force ideas of health, as well as promoting altered states of consciousness as a way to health through meditation. And of course, yoga, and my whole series on yoga, which is the equivalent of a book, is at the www.equip.org website. You just type in yoga, and the search engine will bring up my 3-part article on that, and you can get the background on that. So pantheism just pervades our culture. Yoga means union with God, and it's not the biblical God it's talking about. In the context in which it was developed, it was Hinduism, it was India, and it was Brahman, the impersonal God, or some other concept of God within Hinduism that yoga is seeking to yoke you to. That's what yoga means, to yoke or to unite you to the Hindu God. That's what all of those postures and moral disciplines and breathing exercises and meditation exercises and everything are geared to do. And so can you do that without getting caught up in it, in the larger stream of where it's supposed to be taking you? Some people seem to practice yoga without any notable spiritual ill effects. But is it a wise practice for a Christian? I would say no. However, there are other stretch exercises, Pilates. I don't see a spiritual problem with that. That are alternatives. There's a Christian stretch exercise program called Praise Moves, which you can look up on the website, and I've looked into that, and I don't have a problem with that at all. In fact, I think it's beneficial. So there are alternatives, but I don't recommend yoga. But anyway, on to our critique of pantheism. We've already looked at pantheism from the standpoint of two of the three evaluations that I recommend in your notes. And we see it has a problem explaining the origin of the universe. If God is pure awareness and the universe itself is ignorance or avidya, an illusion, or maya, the Sanskrit words for these things, then how did the universe begin? And we saw that there isn't a satisfying explanation for that. When they try to say God is playing a game called Lila, in which he imagines himself as a universe, they've turned God into a personal being. But their definition of God is that he's impersonal. He doesn't get involved in relationships. And they also have a problem explaining the multiplicity within the universe, because if the universe is one without differentiation, and there is no duality, there is no multiplicity, then why is it that we experience the universe as multiple? And we see that they can't come up with a satisfying explanation for that either. So the third problem with pantheism is, just as atheism had a problem explaining the phenomenon of humanity in the universe, so does pantheism. And this, again, even as I said that the strongest argument against atheism is human nature itself. We are the best argument against atheism prior to reaching the Bible, which of course is an even more powerful refutation of it. I would say the same thing with pantheism, that these other reasons are insurmountable logical problems, and they cause it to already have failed the test that we've set up for testing worldviews, which is logical consistency. But when it comes to human nature, to me, it's the coup de grace. I mean, to me, as a former pantheist, and I embrace this, I believed in it, and I thought I was going to be a pantheist for the rest of my life. I thought that this was great. It was much better than atheism. It allowed for there to be God. In some sense, I had eternal life since I was a part of God, and God lives forever. It seemed to be giving me hope for the future, this coming new age, the Aquarian age. It seemed to be providing me with what I was looking for. And so I understand the attraction of pantheism. I'm a nature lover. It made nature one, nature was divine now, So I had good metaphysical or worldview grounding for my appreciation of nature, So, and it was hip, it was cool, it was a new belief, back in the 60s and 70s, Eastern religions, gurus and all that was very exotic, we hadn't seen those around much at all, and all of a sudden, so they're coming here and they're teaching us something different. We were fed up with the establishment, and that included the establishment's religion, so to be able to try something unfamiliar to us this way that in many ways seemed attractive, was great. So I understand the attraction of pantheism, but there is no way that it can be true based on the tests that I'm giving you here. And the one that I'm talking about, human nature, to me, we change the ball game in a sense. We change the whole dynamic. Our own very nature is something that presents us with certain realities. It presents us with the reality of logic. It presents us with the reality of morality. It presents us with the concept of self-awareness, speech, relationship, the idea of people coming into a relationship as the ultimate experience, and so personality is something that we bring into the universe, and once it's here, this is how we experience the universe, this is how we experience life, and this is where we find meaning, in the dimensions of our personality. But our personality, which we can't deny, we have to be true to our nature, it needs a grounding somewhere. And we are an insufficient ground for ourselves. In other words, we have a moral nature. We have to live by the idea that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. We can't escape living that way. It's the way that we are. We need to find a foundation for our personal lives as well as for society, for being able to say, this is right and this is wrong, this is good and this is evil. And if morality originated with us, as atheism says, then we can't find a grounding for our own lives, for our own natures. But in pantheism, you think, okay, they believe in God, so that solves the problem. But it doesn't solve the problem, because the God of pantheism is impersonal without attributes. And so in a pantheistic worldview, you have got to bring morality down to a lower level. It's a part of Maya, which is illusion. It is a part of this illusory world. It is actually a part of ignorance. It didn't exist in God. Okay, in pantheism, the universe is it's temporary, but it's coming back. In other words, history is cyclical. Instead of history having a beginning and then a consummation, as in a biblical worldview, instead you have what are known as the days and nights of Brahman. Brahman is the name for the impersonal absolute, for God. And there are the nights of Brahman are when Brahman is unmanifest. All there is Brahman. He's not involved in this dream of the world, where he subjects himself to this dream that the world is going on. Then you go into the day of Brahman, and in the day of Brahman, he creates the world in his own mind, parcels himself out into innumerable souls, plunges those souls into a reincarnational or transmigrational journey in which ultimately they come back to him. So that is the day of Brahman, okay? And then at the consummation of it all, it's another night of Brahman, and there's nothing. And so this whole process goes on for eternity. So history, therefore, does not have a purpose or a direction. But when the world is manifest, then you get all of these illusory dualities, such as good and evil. Okay, and so within the nature of this dream world, the universe, there are certain rules that obtain. There are certain laws and everything that govern it. And morality is a part of it, okay? And, but morality is relative. Within the Hindu system, I'm sure you've heard the word dharma before. Well, dharma means duty. And morality is all about your dharma. It's doing your duty. But dharma is relative to the caste that you're in. The caste meaning the social class that you're in, the station in life that you're born into. So what is morally right for somebody in one caste may not be morally right for somebody else. So that's why in the classic Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, you have the blue god Krishna appearing and being driven by the warrior Arjuna. And Arjuna is going to war with even some of his own relatives. And he's troubled by this. And so he has a dialogue with Krishna in which he talks about his moral conflict in going to war. And Krishna explains to Arjuna that this is his dharma, because he's in the warrior caste. To fulfill his duty, he needs to go to war and not to worry about it. And so this is where morality then is located in the pantheistic worldview. It is a part of life, and it is to fulfill your duty. It's not as though there are absolute 10 commandments that everybody is bound by. It's all relative. And as you seek your own salvation, you've gone through this reincarnational process for thousands of years, and you reach the point where you go even beyond the warrior caste, and you're now in the Brahmin, with an I instead of an A, Brahmin caste, which is the priestly caste, now you have got the leisure time that after you fulfill your duties in life, you can renounce society, renounce your family, go off into a monastery or out into the forest or something and pursue your own salvation. And then at that point, you go through a system of yoga under the tutelage of a guru and the supervision of a guru who you have to worship, and you worship whatever gods that guru identifies with, and there's a pantheon of gods within Hinduism. But you go through this long disciplinary process, and through yoga, through meditation, through asceticism, denying the body, you can eventually reach the point in which you lift up the Kundalini serpent energy up through your chakras or your psychic centers until eventually this energy passes through these different centers that represent different orientations toward life, whether it would be just basic survival, whether it be sex, whether it would be power, or whether it would be someone who is actually benevolent and has the heart chakra and is compassionate and concerned about others. Well, you pass through in rising up the Kundalini energy. You pass through a period where you're concerned about others, but then you transcend that to a higher level, and ultimately you get to the crown chakra, and at that point you achieve, hopefully, enlightenment. And at that point, then, you have transcended all duality and become one with Brahman, and you may not even worship the gods anymore. You've now really seen things as they really are, and you realize that all is one. So you have gone beyond, and this is the goal within pantheism, beyond good and evil, and become one with God, who himself or itself is beyond good and evil. So you see, you've heard the saying, you become like your God. Well, I was plunged into this whole thing, and through the aid of drugs, I was accelerating this whole process. I wasn't going through a guru system. I was, reading some books, but mainly just going out in nature, meditating, and, taking psychedelic drugs to accelerate my own spiritual unfoldment, And of course, this wouldn't be approved by a lot of people within Hinduism, but yet, despite that lack of maybe that they would give approval and validation to what I was doing, I was rapidly on my own coming to all the same conclusions without even reading a lot of the books, coming to the same conclusions. So I obviously had some kind of spiritual capacity for this whole thing. As you go through it, what was happening was I was less concerned about personal relationships. I was detached from my own history, my own sense of self, the person who had grown up in Long Beach, California, and who had this history. I was very detached from that. I was in what's called the now, and I was really not identifying with the person inside this body. I was identifying with all of the universe, with everything around me. And I felt, a sense of ecstasy a lot of the time. It was very blissful. But at the same time, I was going through a process of depersonalization. I was out of touch with myself, and I didn't even have a sex drive anymore. I was going through an odd kind of depersonalization. I was becoming like my God. I was just living in a state of pure consciousness, like the God of pantheism. Okay, so I was transcending duality. I was transcending good and evil. And what was I achieving? Well, I thought that I was one with the flow of the universe, and I was, as long as I stayed in that flow, I could do no wrong. And there were people around me who actually looked at me and said, boy, I wish one day I could be perfect like you are. You know, I mean, looking back on it, I wasn't anywhere near perfect, but this is the kind of delusion, you know, that you can enter into when you lose your mooring of a real sense of good and evil. Was I an exemplary person who was going out and helping people? No, I was just living in a commune in the woods with people, but I seemed very, you know, I had good vibes, you know, I seemed very peaceful. I didn't get upset with people, you know. So I thought I was arriving. I thought I was achieving this. And, but this transcending good and evil idea contradicts what we most fundamentally know to be true, you know, that morality matters, you know, and so when you're in this realm, also logic is transcended. So you're not thinking critically about what you're experiencing, because that would be going down, back down into the level of duality, where there's truth and falsehood, where there's subject and object, you know, where there's multiple objects of existence. And so you think you found a way to transcend that, to achieve this unity consciousness, all is one, you know. But what you're doing is really you're denying your humanity, and you're putting it at a lower level as something that needs to be transcended. But in the real world, the question is, can you do that? And if we look at the examples that Hinduism offers of people who claim that they have transcended good and evil, I was aware of many different gurus, both in India and in America and in Europe, different parts of the country, who supposedly had achieved enlightenment. And some of them even claimed to be avatars or manifestations of God in bodily form. And they were worshipped by their disciples. If anybody could arrive and show us what God consciousness, enlightenment, God self-realization with a capital S, you know, God realization, realizing yourself as God, what this could be like, it would be these gurus, these avatars, these yogis. And yet, everyone that I'm aware of had severe moral contradictions. I mean, there were a couple I held out as, well, here's a couple of guys that I've never heard anything bad about them. And then I came to find out that there were things that they were doing as well. For example, probably the most revered guru in all of India is Satya Sai Baba, who claims to be a manifestation of God, who works miracles and so forth. And there are politicians who worship him. He has influence with the government. But it has come out that for decades he has been, sexually abusing the males within his ashram. He has moved them into positions of intimacy with him, and then he's taken advantage of them. And because he's supposed to be an avatar, God incarnate, people receive this. And Swami Muktananda, who, back in the 70s was the most sensational and sought after guru of the stars and so forth here in America, but he also was based in India. Well, it turned out he was doing something similar to what Satya Sai Baba was doing, only it was with his female disciples. He'd bring them in and he would sexually take advantage of them. Okay, and then Rajneesh, back in the 80s, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, some of you may remember him. He was this sort of outrageous guru who had God consciousness, and he came to America and he'd built up a following of, he had an ashram in Pune, India, where people would flock to from Europe and America and so forth. And then eventually he relocated here in America, and I actually went up to check out his headquarters in Antelope, Oregon. They basically, they were building their own city called Rajneeshpuram, but it was right near a town called Antelope, and they were taking over Antelope. Well, it turns out, they were having a lot of battles with the locals. Well, it turns out that they actually attempted, the people within his ashram, working directly under his guidance, attempted to poison the milk of the whole town of Antelope with salmonella. They actually tried, especially particular politicians who were running against them, because they had their own politicians in this election. And so, they tried to select out people within the town that they wanted to eliminate from competition and tried to poison them. Okay, so these kinds of things, I mean, it just keeps happening. That moral problems show up. Swami Satchidananda, he seemed to be above reproach. And then it turns out that he was sexually abusing his female secretaries. And okay, so this is the pattern that you see. So the gurus claim that they have followed the whole process, the whole path to salvation that pantheism offers, and that they have achieved what is possible, which is enlightenment, and they have transcended good and evil. But when we look at what that actually turns out to be, it just turns out to be that they have, having disregarded the need to be concerned about good and evil, they have simply completely fallen over on the evil side of things without any moral check or accountability or restraint. Okay, and then the disciples who are trying to follow in their path through developing meditation and achieving oneness with the universe, therefore leaving behind the dualities and the inferior approach of logic. In other words, logic is good for earthly things, but when it comes to spiritual matters, you need to transcend it. You'll just have an experience that will confirm what the truth is to you, and you won't need to logically evaluate it. You will have transcended the duality of logic, and this is what the disciples are doing. Well, in actual practice, in actual life experience, what that turns out to be is you've got all these disciples who allow themselves to be continually abused year after year by their guru. All these followers of Satya Sai Baba and his indiscretions have been publicized, and people just, they refuse to look at that critically. They say, they buy into the very crude attempts to justify it that, oh, these are just people trying to discredit the guru, or, the guru would never do that. That's just unenlightenment speaking. No true logical refutation of these allegations of his abuses of his disciples. There's been no evidence supplied to disprove it, but they continue to worship him anyway and allow him to continue to prey on them on the basis of having jettisoned logic as a valid method for testing things, you see. So in the real world, when you try to transcend morality, and when you try to transcend logic, you simply end up becoming evil and vulnerable to exploitation by evil people because you've put aside your critical faculties. So what does this then tell us about morality? It tells us that when you try to live out the pantheistic view of human nature, instead of validating that which we know intuitively is what really precious about us, our reason, our capacity for goodness, our capacity for meaningful relationships. Instead, as you follow the pantheistic course, you end up denying and negating and neutering that which makes you special, that which gives meaning to your life, that which sets you apart from a slug. Okay, you end up neutering all that. What you also do is you demean God, you debase God, because what you're doing now, if all is God in reality, then this has to mean that Adolf Hitler, who, ordered the genocide of the Jews and was responsible for 6 million of them being killed, as well as, millions of other people, gypsies, homosexuals, even Christians, Adolf Hitler and Pol Pot and Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and, Idi Amin, you name the political leader who has been responsible for evil, Joseph Stalin. All of these people are just as much God as Jesus Christ in nature. They just haven't realized it the way Jesus did, you see. So what you're doing at this point is you're associating God with evil. So you're debasing God through this view. So pantheism does not correspond. What it does is it reverses our own achievement of our potential by denying its value, by denying that there's any real value in that which actually gives dignity and meaning to our lives. And you cannot live consistently with it, because even people who are exploited this way, they still have a moral sense of what is right and wrong, but the guru becomes what is good. And anybody who would attack the evil becomes what is evil. So even the people that allow themselves to be exploited because of denying the existence of good and evil on a certain level can escape such thinking in their own response to people like me who would be criticizing it. Oh, that's an evil man. He's criticizing, the guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi or whatever. He's criticizing the guru, therefore he's evil. So they can't live consistently with that worldview. So again, we see then that pantheism fails all three tests that we've put it to, for being able to explain the origin of the universe, the multiplicity within the universe, and the phenomenon of humanity within the universe. So what I want to do at this point is just review what we've learned so far, okay?
I was just wanted to bring one thing up.
Yeah.
You said about each culture having a different idea of what good and evil is, in their own perspective culture.
Mm-hmm.
That creates a big problem in the United States of America when you got a multiple culture.
It sure does, yeah.
So everybody's got a different idea about what is good and what is evil.
Right.
So, under that thing, it's no wonder what's happening.
Yes.
Pantheism is starting to be accepted in this country.
Right, and pantheism is very much connected to and supports the relativistic idea of morality that's a part of postmodernism, of the culture that we're living in. It's not that all postmodernists are pantheists, but it is that a pantheist makes a good postmodernist, and it supports it. It gives a metaphysical justification for it, because everybody's beliefs are simply relative. Okay, so what I want to look at before we open it up for questions and answers is just to review what we've learned so far to this point. We've looked at polytheism, we've looked at materialism, and we've looked at pantheism. And as we've examined each worldview, we've found deficiencies that point us toward a clearer picture of what ultimate reality should look like. When we looked at polytheism, we saw that we need one ultimate reality. There cannot be more than one ultimate reality. And we also saw that it needs to be infinite. A finite source cannot be responsible for this seemingly infinite universe with all of its vast complexity, with all the power that would have been needed to create it, the knowledge that would have been needed to create it, the presence everywhere to sustain it. A finite source is inadequate. So ultimate reality needs to be infinite, and it needs to be one. From materialism or atheism, we've also seen that we need a source that is not like the physical universe, which is inherently temporal in all of its parts. There can't be anything about it that has eternally existed. So we need a non-physical or spiritual source. And that source needs to be absolute. It can't be relative. It needs to be absolute to ground our own morality. In other words, our very moral natures can find no grounding. They are a fact, they're here, they're a part of us, but we can't ground them if there is no absolute basis for morality. And we see also, so that's answering the morality issue, and then we also see from our examination of atheism that ultimate reality, or the source of the universe, needs to be intelligent to answer for the design that we see in the universe. And so both atheism and pantheism have failed, as both of them are opposite poles of naturalism. So we could say naturalism has failed to give us an adequate grounding for what we know most familiarly of all, and that is personality. Because neither has a personal source for the universe, neither can ground things that are most important to us. So we can't live according to these worldviews, and we have to set them aside. Those who do believe in them have to set them aside and live as though something else were true. And so this is as good a way as any that I can think of to fail the test of worldviews that we have established in this class, which is consistency. You cannot live consistently by either pantheism or atheism. So both of them teach us, in a sense, the lessons we learn from looking at them, that ultimate reality, in addition to the other things, needing to be absolute, needing to be intelligent, needing to be spiritual or non-physical, needing to be infinite, needing to be one, well, it also needs to be personal. So, that being the case, already the outline of what ultimate reality needs to be is a very good fit for the God of the Bible. But there's been an attempt made by people who see a value in pantheism because it makes nature divine, it makes human beings divine, it allows for evolution. All of these things are beliefs and values that people have today. So there's been an attempt to take sort of the best of pantheism and mix it together with the best of theism, which is the idea that God is personal, that we can have a personal relationship with Him, that we are real, the world is real, and that history is going somewhere rather than cyclical. The positive things that theism has to offer, and bring them together into a new adaptation, which is actually something that does have ancient precedent, but to bring it together in sort of a contemporary new view, and that is what is known as panentheism, the belief that God is in the world, and the world is and people are a part of God, but we are not identical with God. And so that is what we're going to look at next week, as well as deism. I'm going to move through both of those worldviews and make every effort to move through both of those worldviews next week, so we'll have enough time to then turn to theism and look at what Christians believe. But what about Judaism? What about Islam? They are also theistic. Why are we believing Christianity instead of them? We'll deal with all of those issues before the month of April is through. So,
did you see this weekend there was a rather lengthy article in the Wall Street Journal from a professor of anthropology, and the gist of the article was that religion is really nothing more than conditioning the brain. That essentially we like being in relationship with other people, we get a positive reaction, and it's really a form of conditioning the human mind to justify our need for God, and rather than any scriptural basis, although the scriptural stories may in fact just simply reinforce that we've been, as a people, as a culture, sort of reconditioned.
right. Okay, that is really good. I hope everybody heard what Tim just said. We actually have an article on this coming out in the next issue of the Christian Research Journal. We're always dealing with contemporary issues. So thank you for that segue into an advertisement. To subscribe, you go to www.equip.org. You click on journal. But to answer what he's saying, I love it that he brought that up, because this is supposed to be intimidating to us. That people, we've now got a way to explain religion that doesn't need God. It's just some evolutionary adaptation for survival value. It enhances our survival to have personal relationships, to have belief in God and so forth. All these myths. So everything is explained in terms of evolutionary survival value. Well, that, number one, having sat through weeks of me teaching on this, would you say that sort of begs the question? In other words, you're already assuming naturalism is true without doing a proper evaluation of your, of your worldview options. And so you're presupposing naturalism is true without addressing the problems I've raised with it. Whereas, while that may be true, it may be true that we have religion hardwired into our brain, but why is it hardwired into our brain in the first place? Since everything within nature does appear to be purpose-driven or purposeful, might that not have been part of the design of an intelligent creator? That there is, our physical bodies correspond to our immaterial natures. The wiring circuitry, or using metaphors, or the neurons within our brain are wired to correspond with our souls, in order that we might have a relationship with God. So, you haven't disproved God. If anything, you've enhanced the intelligent design argument by showing that we have these natures. It's not mutually exclusive. You still haven't relieved yourself as an atheist of having to address the problems with naturalism that I've brought up. Phil?
In my readings, various worldviews in the past, I've come to the conclusion the fact that somebody can offer up an explanation does not mean that they've really explained anything at all.
Exactly.
And that there's a lot of whacked out views across the spectrum on reality or whatever. I've read why people believe weird things, and atheism explained, and Richard Dawkins' Mount Improbable is not an explanation for anything but just a restatement of the problem.
Exactly, and that's something I've been emphasizing in this class, is just because somebody can come up with an alternative scenario to explain something doesn't mean they've explained it, doesn't mean they've provided adequate proof for it, or they have dismissed, the Christian's position. It just means you can construct, we're very intelligent, God gave us that, and we can construct imaginative scenarios that seem to relieve the need to believe in theism. But what you got to ask is, have they actually answered the problems with their own worldview, and have they actually disproved the theistic position? So this is critical thinking that we as Christians need to develop living in a post-Christian age, because our faith is always under attack. I found that out. So anybody else have any questions?
They want to prop up whatever that idea is next to Christianity and say, well, we're both theories in a sense, And,
right.
You may say I can't prove mine, but you can't prove yours either. But the fact is, there's all kinds of proof of our God.
Exactly.
We become better and better at not arguing, but talking about the God that's real and provable.
Right. And we haven't even, I've been giving what could be considered to be natural theology or general revelation proofs for the existence of God from nature. I haven't even gotten into proofs from the Bible yet. And that is overwhelming. There's so much historical evidence to support the Bible, textual evidence, and they haven't, they haven't begun to address that or disprove that. So you got all this weight of evidence on the side of theology, and then you got somebody coming along who hasn't supported logically their worldview, saying, well, but I've got an alternative view that makes your view unnecessary. Well, no, it doesn't disprove it. You still have to prove your own worldview.
And the test of consistency typically has failed for that, which you've already demonstrated.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said you had been to India?
No, I'd been to Rajneesh, Oregon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, a few years ago, we were in India.
Okay,
and,
good.
We were asking, because of course you see so much poverty, and so we asked our guide, Alan was saying, if we had this poverty in the
Yes.
States, there would be a lot of crime, because people have nothing. And,
Right.
And so our guide said, well, this, because of the caste system, this is their role in life right now, and they don't commit crimes because they're trying to better themselves so that they're next. Well, we kind of thought, well, that's good to tell the tourists. But is that indeed they just hardly survive? survive from day to day, but they will just be totally content with that to have their
Dharma,
next.
right?
It is the Dharma, it's karma, like whatever lot you're in life, you created it through your bad karma or good karma or whatever, so it's justice. So if you fight it, try to change your Dharma, try to change your lot in life, you're simply propelling yourself through even more incarnations in poverty because you're not simply working with the situation. So yes, does this mean that India is crime-free, that we don't need to worry about being sort of supervised in our tour? We can just sort of wander through, Bombay or, not worry about being mugged, robbed. Of course not. They have crime in India. But it does mean that, some of the things sociologists point out are true, or cultural anthropologists, and that is people's belief system, their mythology, whatever, serves society to help keep society cohesive and functioning. So society has continued for millennia there because these beliefs help keep people in line and tie things together. However, what about the individual? Unless you happen to be in the higher caste, well, your lot in life is misery. So is that a desirable thing for society? I don't think Gandhi thought it was. He was trying to break out of some of these things that were the logical implications of his own belief. And although he was an exemplary person in many ways, he had to draw upon Jesus Christ for a lot of his teaching, And so, again, there's a functionality to some of these beliefs, but that doesn't mean that it corresponds with ultimate reality. George?
Yeah, another reason why they don't find these issues as being crimes is because they redefine crime. So in their society, it's okay to burn a woman alive if she has dishonored you in some way. And in the same way, they can't even see the fact that their own caste system itself is criminal. But they don't see it because in their system it's accepted.
Right. And it's only through Western influences that there's an attempt right now to better the lot of the untouchable caste, which for many, many centuries and millennia was just horrendous. A whole, caste of people that had no rights. And
Yeah, the only point I was making was that there's more crime there than there is here, but they have redefined it.
yeah.
So.
Well, and another thing about it is that, in comparing the West to the East, it's not like, okay, this is what Christianity gets you, look at the West. Wait a second, the very people who might be pointing that out have contributed to the derailing of the West from Christianity, and not in the whole proliferation of relativistic values, which has upset the moral foundation of this culture. And we as Christians, we know that everybody has a sin nature, and even in the Puritan days or whatever you want to look at, you're going to find crime, you're going to find evil happening. So it's always, without saying the basis for morality is relative, it's all, when you're looking at human society, it's relative from the standpoint that there's going to be sin, there's going to be evil in any society, but are there counterbalancing forces of morality and goodness and constraints on the evil? In our present situation, there's a lot of chaos going on in our culture, but that's not the fault of Christianity. It's the fault of the cultural pluralism that Jim was talking about, and the breakdown of traditional values within our society because of all this postmodern relativism and humanism. So, I guess that we pretty well filled out our time.
Yeah.